a somber mood for the Republic of Kenya following the death of former Prime Minister Raila Odinga.
Raila Odinga's passing.
Na Raila Odinga ameaga dunia.
Kenya woke up quieter that morning. No rallies, no whistles cutting through the city, no convoys of pickup trucks painted orange zigzagging through estates. For the first time in over 40 years, Raila Odinga wasn't fighting for anything or fighting with anyone. No case in court, no petition on his desk, no statement waiting to be read to the press. He was gone. And in that silence, a country that had grown used to his voice had to confront a new sound: life without Baba.
In honor of the Right Honorable Raila Odinga's extraordinary contribution to our nation, I have declared a 7-day period of national mourning, during which the national flag shall fly at half-mast across the Republic of Kenya and in all our missions abroad.
Word spread fast, from Nairobi to Kisumu, to the smallest villages where news still arrives by radio or through a neighbor's hurried whisper at the gate. Phones lit up in the dark, screens filled with his face one more time. Timelines flooded with the same 3 words: he is gone. The man who had contested every system, every president, every era, had finally bowed to time. Outside his gate, generations met each other in their grief. The women who first saw him in the 1990s, standing on car roofs in muddy fields, stood beside young men and women who only knew him from hashtags and live streams. Some came to mourn a hero. Some came to say goodbye to a fighter. Some came simply because it felt wrong to stay at home on a day like this. Even those who had voted against him, who cursed every time he called for protests, paused and listened to the silence he had left behind. Kenya did not just lose a politician that day. It lost an argument, a constant pressure, a familiar tension in the air. Before the funeral came the memories. Old footage resurfaced, grainy black and white pictures of a younger man walking beside his father, images of prison gates, of headlines calling him dissident, traitor, rebel, detained without trial, locked away for years for what he believed, exiled in spirit, even when his feet stood on Kenyan soil. Beaten, tear-gassed, dragged from rallies into police trucks, defeated at the ballot again and again, watching results shift in the dead of night, watching courts stamp judgments that cut through his hopes like paper, but never broken. Every time the system pushed him down, he found a way back to the stage. Every detention produced a new slogan. Every loss produced a new coalition. Every betrayal produced a new chapter. Some politicians seek comfort, soft office, a quiet board seat, a gentle retirement. Raila chose conflict, because to him silence meant surrender. Silence meant accepting that powerful would always rule the powerless. He lived his life as if politics was not a career, but a permanent state of resistance. Even when he sat inside government as Prime Minister, as handshake partner, he still spoke like an outsider, looking in through the window. And that is how he saw himself, and that is how millions learned to see him too.
I have confidence
I know that the people of this country have got a lot of hope and trust in me because they want to see change and they see me as representing the change that they desire.
To millions, he was Baba, the father of their political awakening, the man who gave words to feelings they could not name. In the slums of Nairobi, in the fishing beaches of Nyanza, in the dusty towns of the Rift, people would gather when he spoke, hoping that if he shouted loud enough, someone in power would finally listen. To others, he was instability, the man whose rallies meant roads might close, shops might burn, and tear gas might drift into living rooms where children were trying to sleep. A reformer, a disruptor, a problem. There are Kenyans who will never forgive him for the elections that ended in violence. There are Kenyans who will never forgive the state for how it answered his calls. The truth of Raila Odinga sits somewhere in those uncomfortable spaces. But history rarely remembers the comfortable man. It remembers the stubborn ones, the ones who make life difficult for those who would rather it stayed the same. Raila forced Kenya to argue with itself about tribe, about power, about who deserved a seat at the table. For some, the argument was exhausting. For others, it was the only reason they felt alive in their own country. In the end, Raila Odinga became something bigger than elections. He turned from candidate into a symbol. Presidents came and went. Moi, who once jailed him, Kibaki, who shed power but not trust, Uhuru, who turned from rival to partner. But he remained, not just a candidate, but a constant, a colossus in Kenya's political landscape, too big to ignore, too loud to silence, too stubborn to erase. Whenever crisis struck, microphones somehow found their way to his doorstep. Even when he lost, the story was still told in relation to him. Was he cheated? Was he out-strategized? Or was he simply unlucky? Those questions filled newspapers, talk shows, street debates in matatus and markets. When one man's career becomes the measure of your democracy, you are no longer talking about a politician. You are talking about a force. When they finally laid him to rest, the journey was long, through highways he had once blocked in protest, through towns where he had both inspired hope and provoked rage, past markets that had shut down every time he called for boycotts. People lined the roads not just to say goodbye, but to witness the end of an argument that had lasted a lifetime. Even his rivals showed up. Men who had campaigned against him, beaten him, mocked him, stood up when he was being laid to rest. Because, love him or hate him, you could not tell the story of Kenya without him. For decades he fought to be above the soil, above the system, above the lies and the losses. Now finally he belonged to the very ground he had fought over.
The king is dead, but long live the crown.
He ran for president 5 times and never won. By the rules of politics, that sounds like failure, but by rules of history, It sounds like sacrifice, because some men inherit power born into it, handed the keys by blood and friendship. Others spend their lives challenging it, refusing to accept that the story is already written. And those men, those constant troublemakers of history, change nations. Maybe he never wore the crown, but he carried a country on his shoulders. Detained, exiled, defiant, but unforgettable.
Joey! Go Joey Neguambo!